Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at this incredibly insightful article published on TidyHQ by Isaac Dury.
Yeah, it's a great piece.
It really is. And we're using it to answer, well, one really critical question. How do we fix the messy, kind of chaotic governance of grassroots sports without, killing the volunteer spirit that keeps those sports alive in the first place?
Right, because that balance it's incredibly fragile.
Exactly. So our mission here is to strip away all the corporate jargon and figure out what good governance actually means for local clubs. Now, usually when we hear the word governance, there's this immediate mental image that pops up.
Oh, absolutely. You picture corporate boardrooms.
Heavy glass tables, tailored suits.
Very serious people holding thick briefcases.
Yeah, it feels heavy, rigid, and just deeply corporate.
It feels like the language of Wall Street, right? Like it's completely detached from anything resembling our everyday lives.
Right. But then you contrast that sleek corporate image with the reality of a local sports club. Think about a Saturday morning cricket team or, a 30-member community tennis club.
Oh, yeah, totally different vibe.
You're dealing with muddy boots, people organizing orange slices out of the back of a minivan.
Just trying to keep things running.
Yeah, and a couple of stressed volunteers desperately trying to stop a pop-up gazebo from, blowing away in the wind.
You're operating in a completely different universe.
And I bet you, the listener, have been a part of one of these local clubs at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you were dropping your kids off, or maybe you were the one fighting the gazebo.
Someone has to hold the gazebo down.
Right. But the standard assumption is that governance in that context just means having a basic constitution shoved in a drawer somewhere.
Yeah, a dusty drawer.
You hold an annual general meeting once a year. The treasurer reads a few financial numbers off a crumpled piece of paper. Everyone claps. You all go home.
We tend to equate governance with the mere existence of paperwork. We assume that as long as there's a document with the word Constitution on it, governance is magically happening.
Okay, let's unpack this because we are going to completely shatter that assumption today. Because bringing corporate boardroom rules to a Saturday morning cricket match is just, well, it's a recipe for disaster.
It really is.
The whole thing just collapses under its own weight.
Yeah.
So to understand what actually works, we need to completely redefine the term.
Which requires going back a couple of decades, actually. In 2004, Sport New Zealand, which was then known as SPARC, they published a definition of governance specifically for this space.
Okay.
And what makes it brilliant is its brevity. It's just 9 words long.
Wait, really? Just 9 words?
Just 9. They define governance as the system by which organizations are directed, controlled, and accountable.
Directed, controlled, and accountable. That's the entire definition.
That's it. And what's crucial here is what they left out, There's no mention of compliance frameworks. They don't mandate complex risk registers or demand a dedicated internal audit committee.
Which is a massive relief for the parent who just got roped into running the social tennis club because nobody else raised their hand.
Exactly. It strips away the intimidation factor. It shifts the focus away from procedures for their own sake. You aren't filing paperwork just so you can tell a state body you filed paperwork.
Right, checking boxes.
Yeah, governance becomes about the actual system of decision-making. Are you making sound decisions? Can you clearly explain those decisions to your members?
Yeah.
And crucially, do you have a mechanism to course correct when you inevitably get something wrong?
But doesn't that open the door to chaos? There's this natural temptation to think that fewer rules mean worse decisions. We assume that if we want better governance, we need to, write more rules to cover every possible scenario.
That is a massive trap. More rules do not equal better governance, especially not in volunteer organizations.
Right. And the source material highlights this fantastic insight from Jean Camy at the University of Lyon. He warns against this exact procedural obsession.
Yes, the 40-page Constitution example.
Yeah. Think about 2 different sports clubs in your town. Club A has a 40-page Constitution. It's meticulously detailed, drafted by a lawyer who happened to be on the committee 10 years ago.
Sounds intense.
Covers everything from dispute resolution to, the specific shade of blue on the team uniforms. But because it's so dense and complicated, the current committee completely ignores it. They just make decisions on the fly and do whatever they want.
The document is essentially a 40-page paperweight.
Wait, actually, let me frame it this way. It's not just a paperweight. It's an illusion of safety. Now, imagine Club B. They have a simple 1-page document.
Bare bones.
Incredibly bare bones.
Yeah.
But they have an actual living culture of transparency. If a problem pops up, they call a meeting and talk about it openly. If the treasurer spends club money on new nets, They pin the receipt right to the notice board. Gene Cammy's point is that Club B is vastly better governed than Club A, despite having a fraction of the rules.
Because principles must precede procedures. If the underlying principles aren't embedded in the culture of the club, a 40-page rulebook won't save you.
Right.
The rules only exist to serve the culture, not the other way around.
So if Club B's one-page document works better than a 40-page rulebook, there has to be some kind of invisible engine driving that success. What replaces the rulebook? What are the actual principles we're talking about?
This is where the research from the International Sport and Culture Association, ISTA, and Transparency International Germany becomes incredibly valuable.
Okay, what did they find?
They spend years analyzing grassroots sports organizations across Europe, trying to distill this abstract concept down to its core elements. And they identified 4 fundamental pillars that just have to be present for a club to function well.
And those are?
Democracy, accountability, transparency, and the inclusion of stakeholders.
Let's actually test these, because I can hear some skepticism already from people listening. Let's take that first pillar, democracy. I'm assuming this means more than just, raising your hand at the AGM while everyone looks at their shoes.
Oh, definitely. It means meaningful participation in how the organization is run. It requires contested elections, so you actually have a choice in leadership.
No lifetime presidents.
Exactly. It means rotating positions. You can't have a situation where President Bob has run the club as his personal fiefdom since 1985.
We all know a President Bob.
We really do. And he simply refuses to let anyone else see the books or make a decision. That's not democracy.
Okay, that tracks. The second pillar is accountability. Now, in a corporate setting, that means firing someone. What does it mean when the person making the mistake is an unpaid volunteer?
Well, in this context, accountability is really about traceability. It means decisions can be traced back to the specific people who made them. Financial transactions are documented.
So there's a paper trail.
Yeah. If the committee decides to raise membership fees, the minutes of that meeting are available to the members. When something goes wrong, there is a clear chain of responsibility rather than, a collective shrugging of shoulders.
Then there's the third pillar, transparency. And honestly, as a volunteer, I might push back on this one a bit.
How so?
Well, if I'm giving up my Tuesday night to organize a tennis tournament, I don't want to spend an extra 2 hours logging receipts on some public dashboard. Doesn't transparency just turn into endless red tape?
It can, if it's poorly implemented. But true transparency isn't about busy work, it's about the flow of critical information.
Okay.
The article gives a great example of a transparency failure. It's when conflicts of interest are whispered about in the car park after the meeting, instead of being declared openly on the record.
Ah, right. The car park politics.
Exactly. Transparency means your safeguarding policies are easily accessible to every parent, not buried in some shared digital drive from 6 years ago that nobody even has the password to anymore.
So it's about accessibility, not just data entry. Then we hit the fourth pillar, inclusion of stakeholders. And here's where I really want to challenge the premise.
Go for it.
Why should people who don't even pay membership dues get a say in how the tennis club is run? Like, if you aren't paying to play, why do you get a voice?
Because a community sports organization doesn't exist in a vacuum. The people affected by the club's decisions extend far beyond just the paying players.
Like who?
Well, as the EU White Paper on Sport recognized, stakeholders include the coaches, the referees, the parents standing on the sidelines, even the local neighbors who have to deal with the traffic and noise on game day.
Oh, that's a good point about the
A
neighbor.
sports organization derives its social legitimacy from the participation and goodwill of all those stakeholders.
Social legitimacy. And here's where it gets really interesting, because that idea perfectly tees up Mogens Kirkeby. He's the former president of ISKO, and he introduces this concept called the deal.
Yes, the deal is huge.
I found this fascinating because it answers the fundamental question of why an amateur weekend sports league has to care about governance at all.
Right, the deal is the crucial context for all of this. Grassroots sports enjoy a highly privileged position in our society.
They really do. I mean, think about the massive freedoms and perks society hands over to these clubs. They routinely get tax exemptions. They get exclusive use of prime public parks and expensive community facilities.
Direct government grants, too.
Yeah. Society is handing over real, tangible value to these private, volunteer-run organizations. And Kirkby points out that the deal is a two-way street. In exchange for all these perks, the clubs must govern themselves competently and ethically. They have to manage their risks to maintain their autonomy.
Which brings up the dark side of the deal. What happens when a federation mismanages public funds? Or, worse, when a local club tries to cover up a safeguarding issue to protect their reputation?
Society revokes the privilege. The government steps in, the public demands external regulation, and suddenly you have politicians drafting laws to manage weekend cricket.
Which nobody wants.
No. And as the source notes, external regulation is a brutally blunt instrument. It will crush the life out of a volunteer-run club because lawmakers don't know how to write rules for people operating out of the back of a minivan.
This is why internalizing these 4 pillars is essentially an act of self-preservation for grassroots sports. And Sylvia Schenk from Transparency International Germany makes a really vital observation about how these pillars interact.
Yeah, what does she say?
She argues that transparency isn't just one of 4 equal pillars, it is the absolute bedrock foundation.
Why does transparency get the foundational spot? Why does everything else rely on it?
Think about the mechanics of it. Without transparency, the other 3 pillars simply cannot function.
Okay, walk me through that.
If you're a member and you cannot see the financial records or the meeting minutes, then accountability is impossible. You can't hold the committee accountable for a decision if you don't even know the decision was made.
Oh, I see. I'm operating in a black box.
Precisely. And without accountability, democracy becomes purely performative. Sure, you might be raising your hand to vote at the AGM, but you're voting blind. You're voting on a reality that is completely hidden from you.
So we have this elegant theory. We've got the 4 pillars. The deal with society is clear. The principles are straightforward. But as we shift from the theory to the reality on the ground, we hit a massive wall.
A very solid wall.
Because despite knowing all of this, federations and local clubs still fail at governance constantly. If the theory is so good, why is the execution so bad?
To understand the failure, we have to look at the practical mechanics of how a large sports federation actually operates. The ISCA guidelines outline what they call a systematic approach to compliance.
Okay.
It's an 8-step framework designed to implement those 4 pillars.
Let's walk through this framework as it sounds intense. It starts with an ethics code defining what the organization stands for. Then it moves to establishing zero-tolerance policies, ensuring the tone from the top models good behavior, conducting risk analysis, building structure and guidelines, prioritizing communication and education, setting up whistleblowing channels, and finally, tracking sanctions.
Now pause there. Imagine taking that 8-step systematic approach, complete with whistleblowing channels and formal risk analysis, and handing it to the 30-member social tennis club.
They'd laugh you out of the room. It's ridiculous overkill.
It would completely paralyze them. But scale it up. What if you are the state-level federation?
Oh, right.
You're managing 200 different affiliated clubs across a massive geographic area. You've got thousands of players, coaches, and volunteers. Suddenly, that systematic approach isn't overkill at all. It's the bare minimum required to manage risk, distribute funds fairly, and ensure the safety of children at scale.
Okay, so let's explore the friction here. If the state federation needs this massive 8-step compliance structure, but the local clubs can barely manage a 1-page document, how are they supposed to interact?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Does the state body just micromanage everyone? Do they, send auditors to local committee meetings?
That's the exact tension that causes the system to break down. Henrik Brandt from the Institute for Sport Studies in Denmark provides a really empathetic look at this dynamic. He observed that most governance failures in grassroots sports aren't the result of malicious intent.
Right. We aren't dealing with criminal masterminds siphoning funds to offshore accounts here.
No, we're dealing with exhausted volunteers who are doing their absolute best, but they're trapped within terrible, inadequate systems. They simply don't have the tools to meet the Federation's expectations.
The article gives such a relatable, specific example of this breakdown. Let's look at a safeguarding failure. The state body does everything right. They write an excellent, comprehensive ethics and safeguarding code.
Classic first step.
They send an email out to all 200 affiliated clubs with the code attached, asking them to read and implement it. What happens next? A few hyper-organized clubs print it out and pin it to a notice board. Some just file the email away in a folder. But the vast majority, they never even open the attachment.
And then, 6 months later, the worst-case scenario happens. A parent complains about inappropriate behavior by a coach at a local club. The state body gets involved and says, "We need to see your records showing that your staff read and acknowledged the safeguarding code." and the club has nothing.
The compliance chain just evaporates.
It completely collapses. But let's look at why that club failed to implement the policy. As Henrik Brandt points out, it wasn't intentional negligence. They weren't trying to hide bad behavior.
Right.
The reality is far more mundane. The state body sent the policy to the club secretary's email address, but the person checking that inbox quit 8 months ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The new volunteer never got the login credentials, so they never saw the email.
So a critical safeguarding failure happened not because people are evil, but because of a lost email password.
Exactly. This isn't a failure of morals, it's a failure of infrastructure. It's a fundamental visibility problem. The state body is flying blind. They cannot see what is actually happening at the local level until a crisis forces them to look.
That brings me back to my earlier question about micromanagement. If the state body steps in and tries to force compliance by running the local clubs directly, it violates the very principle of autonomy that keeps community sports alive.
Totally.
If a state bureaucrat tries to dictate how the weekend cricket team organizes their orange slices, the volunteers will just quit. It's that blunt instrument of regulation all over again. So how do we solve this visibility problem without crushing local autonomy?
This specific tension was studied in the ISCA research by Patrick McGrattan from Belfast City Council and Tony Lopp, who manages a massive multi-sport organization in Spain.
What did they find?
They both zeroed in on this delicate balance between accountability and autonomy in federated structures. A state body cannot govern its local clubs directly. It can only set standards, provide resources, and monitor compliance.
Because the actual heavy lifting, the real governance, happens at the club level, driven by volunteers giving up their free time.
Exactly. So the solution to bridging this gap isn't throwing more regulations at the clubs. The solution is building better infrastructure to connect them.
Right, and the source points to specific infrastructure solutions, like using tools such as TidyHQ. I want to try an analogy here to see if I'm grasping the mechanics of this. It sounds a lot like air traffic control.
Okay, I like this.
The state federation is the air traffic controller, and the local club is the pilot. The controller isn't flying the plane for the pilot. The pilot has total autonomy over their aircraft. But the controller needs a radar screen. They need visibility to make sure planes aren't crashing into each other. Is that what we're talking about?
That captures the dynamic perfectly. The Federation needs the radar screen. Let's go back to that lost email scenario. If you have the right infrastructure, a centralized platform like TidyHQ, you don't just blast a PDF out into the void and cross your fingers.
Right, hoping for the best.
You distribute the ethics code through the platform, and the Federation gets a dashboard.
A digital read receipt.
Precisely. They can see the data in real time. They see exactly which clubs have received the policy. They see which local committee members have opened it, read it, and digitally acknowledged it. And crucially, they see the red lights. They see which clubs haven't touched it.
So the Federation knows exactly who needs a phone call on a Tuesday morning to say, hey, did you guys get locked out of your email account again? Instead of waiting for a safeguarding disaster 6 months later.
It's proactive rather than reactive. The dashboard shows you where the gaps are. But we must underscore the most vital distinction here. This infrastructure gives the governing body visibility, but it does not give them control.
Visibility, not control. That seems to be the golden rule for making this work.
It is the only way it works. The constitutional boundaries between the state body and the local club remain completely intact. The clubs maintain their total autonomy.
Right.
They still run their own affairs, they make their own local decisions, and they hold their own elections. The state body isn't telling them how to run their tennis club. The state body is simply verifying that the club is equipped with the right safety and governance standards.
It allows the Federation to trust, but verify. And frankly, it completely removes that terrible administrative burden from the volunteer who's just trying to find the right spreadsheet on a Tuesday night.
It solves the infrastructure gap so the volunteers can actually get back to focusing on the sport itself, which is why they signed up in the first place.
So to bring all of this together for you, the listener, we started out by redefining governance. We learned that, in theory, good governance isn't about endless paperwork, legal jargon, or 40-page constitutions. It's simply about making democratic decisions, being accountable for those decisions, staying radically transparent, and including your stakeholders. That's the ideal.
The perfect world.
Yeah, but we also saw that in practice, when you're dealing with massive federations made up of hundreds of autonomous, volunteer-run organizations, good intentions simply aren't enough to protect the community. Relying on lost emails and scattered spreadsheets is a recipe for failure. You need real, centralized infrastructure to create visibility across the entire network.
Because without that visible infrastructure, you're leaving the safety, fairness, and longevity of the sport entirely up to chance.
And why should you care about this?
Uh,
Well, whether you're a parent dropping your kid off at a regional soccer tournament, a weekend volunteer running the scoreboard, or just a neighbor who appreciates having a vibrant, safe community space in your town. This invisible infrastructure we've been talking about is what actually keeps those spaces running. It's the engine that keeps them safe, fair, and autonomous.
It really is the unseen foundation that allows the joy of the sport to happen at all.
And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. We've spent this entire deep dive talking about grassroots sports. We've seen how this specific framework, prioritizing transparency first and choosing visibility over regulation, is the key to managing chaotic, volunteer-run federations without crushing their independent spirit.
Yeah.
But take a step back and think about other decentralized parts of our society. Could we apply this exact same air traffic control model elsewhere? Think about your neighborhood homeowners association.
Oh, wow.
Think about local community boards or volunteer charity chapters. These groups are constantly plagued by infighting, overregulation, and burnout. If we shifted our focus in those spaces away from drafting endlessly complicated rulebooks and instead focused on building simple, transparent infrastructure that gives visibility without micromanagement, how much healthier could our local communities be? Something to think about the next time you see those muddy boots and orange slices on a Saturday morning.